Okay, so we are going to move on to the next chapter. So we are looking at the chapter of cognition, basically just how your brain processes information, how you store information, how you understand the world around you, just the way that you think. So we're going to start this chapter by talking about memory. Got a few videos on just memory by itself, and then we'll move on to um, problem solving and then language. Um, and the cognition unit is a little bit bigger than the learning unit, so we got a few we got a few videos to churn through. So let's get started. So it's really just a fun tidbit. So the question is what is your earliest memory? And so when you start thinking back on what's the first thing that you remember, most people will describe something at around the age of 3-ish. Generally speaking, unless it is something that is traumatic, people do not remember items that happen before the age of 3. So, what we are going to spend most of these lectures, the next 3 lectures of memory on, is this idea of the information processing model. So, basically, this is just the way in which you store and process um, memory. Basically, it is a 3-step process. The first thing you have is you have encoding, which is basically how you process that information, your understanding of the information. So once again, a coding is processing or understanding the information. So what you have is you have a person who is listening in and trying to, like get that to like understand the words that are being said. So if you have ever um, listened to someone speak a language that you don't know, you really don't won't remember anything that they said. Um, not even the understanding part. You won't be able to reply back like, okay, what did this person just say? And the mouth mouth movements and all of that you won't be able to put back together, and that is because you can't understand it. It's kind of like going into a, I'm sure we've all been in a class where the teacher is talking way over our heads just with concepts that we're just like, what are they saying, using vocabulary that we don't know or understand. That just shows you're just not going to be able to remember it, and if you can't understand what's being said, you're definitely not going to hold on to that information. So the second part is storage. Basically, you are taking that information and you're putting it away somewhere, putting it into storage. We'll talk about long-term, short-term memory here in a video or two. And then finally, we have retrieval, which is the last part of the information processing model. You do not have a memory unless you are able to retrieve that memory. I'm sure we have all studied and tried to remember something, or store something away, and then a week or two later when you're taking your test you're like, oh my gosh, I remember learning this but I cannot retrieve it. That is some type of retrieval failure, and and it happens to all of us. So we'll talk about that in the third video. Okay, so this is the kind of the overview of what we're going to be doing. This video we'll talk about encoding, next video we'll talk about storage, and then the last video we will talk about retrieval and forgetting. So encoding happens in 2 different ways. Um, First, you have automatic versus effortful. So automatic processing is just as it seems. It is something that you don't really have to think about. Think about basic conversations that you have with other people. You don't have to like think about like, oh, what are they saying here? What's going on? Just your kind of casual conversations are all automatic. Now, effortful would be something like a person tells you a really juicy piece of gossip, and so what happens is that you're now like, okay, hold on. what does this mean? Like, what are the, what are the spider webs that extend out from here? What are the repercussions of what's going to happen? Or you're taking a difficult class and they're talking about really intense things, and you have to be like, okay, you know, x squared over the pi of blah 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 blah, and you're trying to like work out each of those things. That would be effortful encoding. How much effort does it take for you to hold on and process that information? So we have three ways in which we encode information. We have semantically, visually, and acoustically. Let me start with visually and acoustically first because they're a little bit easier to understand. So visually is just like, okay, I am processing this based on the picture and my ability to put that picture into my brain. It is the reason why Mr. Monk has so many pictures on all of his slides, is because this is a way to help you remember what's going on. Um, I'm sure there are plenty of people who are thinking back on, on taking a test, trying to recall a thing, and they remember a picture that was on the board. You're like, oh, that picture was funny, or that picture was interesting. That was talking about this. Okay, and then they remember. Acoustically, that is just you are remembering it based on the sound. Think about musicians or people who sing and are able to understand what is going on or remember something based on the sound. Our ability to recognize different people's voices, all that is acoustic encoding. And then finally, we have semantics. So semantically is based on the definition, the term. You are encoding that thing based on what the term or word actually means. So semantically, you are going to encode that information semantically. There's no real good visual or acoustic method of remembering that thing. You are going to remember semantically based on the fact that its definition is this. So think of, just terms that you don't really have a good picture for, or you can't conjure up, but you know what they are, and you just know that based on its meaning, based on its definition. Okay, that is encoding. So we have levels of processing. So the next portion is really looking at how do we um, hold on, not hold on, but how do we get this information into our brain? Basically, this is like studying. How is it that we study or know this information? And like I said, studying is a great example of how we process this information. And so I'll give you some study tips so we'll kind of understand um, the differences between shallow and deep processing. So let's start by picking a penny. Which of these pennies is the correct one? Of the 12 that are here, which of these is the correct penny? Okay, so I'll give you 3 seconds. One, two, three. The correct penny is the one in the top right corner. This right here. In the next slide, I'll show you um, that is the correct one. So why is it that we don't remember this thing? Well, the reason is you can see Abe Lincoln is facing the right, in God we trust, the date here, liberty over here. So why the heck don't we remember this? What's going on? Well, what's going on is the penny's not important. Like you don't need to know information about the penny in order to, you know, go through your daily life okay. Like it just doesn't matter. Um, knowing that maybe Abe Lincoln's on there, that it's this bronzish color, whatever, that's stuff that we know. So this would be an example of shallow processing. This is something that you have processed and you know, but you haven't really spent a lot of time really understanding. And that's because, once again, it's not important. I'm not holding it against anyone that they don't know exactly which penny this is. So When we are looking at shallow processing, we are looking at understanding something at a really base level, at a level of, you know, not like it's something that you couldn't really well explain. It is something that you just don't have a depth of knowledge in. Think about when you have studied for a test. You study all night or whatever. You take the test, you do well, you get your grade, whatever, and then afterwards, the next day, someone asks you about that content, and you're just like, oh, I don't know. That's shallow processing. That is you getting the information down and then that information escaping you. Okay, so useful for passing little tests and whatnot, and a good bit of our knowledge is shallow processing. But let's move on to deep processing. Okay, so deep processing is having a true and good understanding of the content, being able to explain in more than one way about what that information is. Um, the information is meaningful to you. Um, just having a good understanding of that thing. So, an example that I usually give is, can you list the 50 states? On this picture, I know it's a little small, but could you, given time, write down all of the different states and label all the different states? Some of you might be able to, some of you might not. So the people that do, generally speaking, have some type of subjective organization, a way that is personal to recall certain information. So um, uh, some of you guys learned a song that went from that listed the states in alphabetical order, so people could go through and list all the states. Some of you might just start from east to west and just start going like, okay, Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Rhode Island, blah 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 blah. And so um, so these are just ways of um, deep processing, ways to help you retain that information a little bit better. If you are able to make a piece of information personal to you, you are more likely to remember that information. So trying to make info personal to you is a great way of recalling information. This is why I stress so much about creating personal examples in class, is because this is a way for us to retain that information. So another way for deep processing is using what we call a mnemonic device. So a mnemonic device, I'm sure you have all heard of this before. Please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Never eat soggy waffles. These are all memory cues. They are ways of pairing information together to help us remember and retain that information better. So, kind of like subjective organization, mnemonic device is pairing something that you don't know with something that you do know. And that will help you retain information better than just kind of straight memorization.